You did talk about, just sort of, the difference between grassroots activism and stuff like that, and then going straight to reform and straight to policy. But my question was, one of the things that was going through my mind, do you think that in some ways, like, one kind of scratches the other's back as well? Because when you look at the anatomy of a revolution, usually when change is demonstrated through action, through radical journalism, and through community organizing, and through, creating a better media, policy will inevitably follow it. And I kind of contend that we are going to need some policy help here.
Well, that's a really complicated scenario because historically, I'm a history professor. Historically, there clearly are movements that bubble under the surface that eventually can manifest in some serious changes. They come from the bottom, but eventually they do become acknowledged by the institutions of the society, and that's what we would call reform, right? Where the institutions of the society recognize a social problem or a problem with inequality, and they address it and they deal with that. And again, there have been some great reform measures that really have helped, at least in fits or starts, prevent more consolidation, in media ownership and so on.
Right.
Try to fight to keep the internet free, net neutrality. Again, so I'm not going to pretend that those are not real and important issues. They're very important. And those organizations, reform organizations, have done really well, and they have a very important role to play in that area. However, in the so-called back-scratching game, we often feel that there's not a lot of the back-scratching. There's sort of a pushing off the table. Because some of these organizations don't want to hear more of the radical ideas and sometimes are worried that the radical ideas might interfere with their reform objectives. So while we have mostly been happy to work within reform circles to try to influence them and drive them to a further radical, meaning back to the roots of the problem, kind of edge, I can't necessarily say the same for all the people in the media reform movement, many of whom have distanced themselves from groups like UDC and Project Censored. I wish it were a more reciprocal, symbiotic kind of relationship, because I think that that's probably where we would see some significant strides, right? Where each of these angles and each of these avenues would really help push the other. And I don't think that's outside of the possibility. Meaning, I don't think it's outside the spectrum of possibility in terms of reaching some gradual fruition. But the way things are right now, communications policy in the U.S. is actually getting worse. It is getting more consolidated. We see much more corporate influence than ever before. With that, we still have the hope of things like the internet to keep it open. But if you see what's going on the internet, and McChesney probably talked about this when he was on the show.
Yeah, he talked about digital disconnect.
It's not looking great.
Right.
The potential is phenomenal. Where it's heading, not terribly egalitarian or small d democratic. And we think that needs to have a more radical contingent of people addressing it to take it apart. Because I don't think that asking the FCC to do something is really going to change that.